If we had closed, all those people would have lost their homes. We had a staff team, a very small staff team by the end, but all those people would have lost their jobs. The pressure is phenomenal. You're trying to do something good, but you're also carrying the weight of all that stuff with limited resources and quite often a board who are not quite as effective as they could be. And for me, that culminated in, the charity was fine. We rallied and it's now strong and it's doing well. It's got a sort of income generation through through trading activity, which is super helpful because it removes that dependence on grant funding. But all that came very much at the expense of my own health, and I ended up in hospital seriously ill with pancreatitis, which I still suffer with now. That was caused through stress, just from the stress of running that organization and carrying that role. So I left in February 2020, and I thought I would just take my foot off the gas for a bit and do some freelancing. And then COVID happened, and I ended up working with leaders of all sorts of organizations. And again, every single one of them was in crisis. And then on top of that, we're now managing pandemic scenarios and trying to figure out what the hell they were going to do with their staff team and keep their services running. And much of what I ended up doing was supporting them with strategy and crisis management. And actually, from my perspective, doing that from the outside where I wasn't having to carry that weight was quite an eye-opener for me, because it made me realize just how stressed I'd become. And I don't think you realize when you're in the midst of it just how profound that stress is. So burnout for me is very real. I'm very passionate to see changes in the way that nonprofits and social enterprises and purpose-driven organizations in general operate. I want to see an increase in recognition for core costs, as we all know. I want to see them working more as a business, and by that I mean recognizing how much things cost and getting that income accordingly. So no longer trying to be everything to everybody and no longer giving things away for free at the expense of the well-being of the staff team. And if there's anybody here from a local authority, I say this with great passion: please, please, please start paying the non-profit sector properly for the services that they're providing you, because they are currently propping public sector services up, and it's not acceptable. There you go. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Thanks.
No, stay on it. We need you to stay on
it. So great. So Fran, dare I ask? Gonna set you off again. I guess for me, one of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is the burnout of an individual, and actually how this relates to the resilience of the organisation, and how the two come together. So one of the things that we do in Mantle is we have an audit resilience format that we follow when we're working with clients, that kind of helps us to see what's happening in various different areas of the business, from HR right through to demonstrating social impact and kind of governance. And it's something that we talk about a lot, but I'd just like you to share a little bit about, for you, how does the burnout of leaders connect to that whole organisation? And then what does that mean for that kind of whole organisation as an entity when that goes wrong?
Yeah, I think it's like building a house on sand. If your organisational resilience is based upon a very committed leadership team and staff team often who are willing to go that extra mile to keep things going, that's not sustainable. It's great and it's lovely that they're doing that, and it's really great that the social impact is still coming through, but it's not sustainable. You can't run an organisation over the long term on the goodwill of the staff team, because it's not fair, and eventually those people will burn out, and then your entire infrastructure will start to crumble. So yeah, the resilience framework that we designed is based on some work that came out of the Charities Aid Foundation on resilience. So they did quite a lot of research into this, and identified that this is, it's a thematic issue across charities and social enterprises. we've been cut to the bone, haven't we? Financially, we've been cut and cut and cut to the point where we're striving to continue to deliver those same services, but we're doing it on a shoestring, and that shoestring is threading, So I think the thing to recognize is at this stage now it becomes a very serious risk issue, and it's a governance issue that boards need to be viewing through that lens of risk. Boards, whether they're charity boards of trustees, social enterprise board of directors, purpose-driven business boards of whatever makeup they are, have strategic oversight of that organization, and that includes risk. That includes making sure that everything is considered from a risk perspective, not just funding. That includes well-being, that includes succession planning, that includes organizational knowledge and retained knowledge that will go with a leader who ends up burning out and leaves. It's a risk issue. I think that's my key message here. It's a risk issue, and boards need to be taking ownership of it through that lens of risk.
And I think also there's a financial element to it as well, right? So as a board, when you're looking at the finances and your budgeting, actually how many boards and CEOs are actually putting a budget in for things like training, or if you're working in wellbeing, supervision. I mean, Fran and I had a very recent client earlier this year that they were working in the therapy world, and their staff were not getting supervised, and it hadn't been factored in any of the budgets, and obviously that just led, these were therapists and they weren't getting external clinical supervision. So I think we don't factor that into our budgets. So when we're thinking about the cost of employment, actually, when you're looking to employ somebody, you should be looking at the cost of employment, the national insurance, the tax, the pension, everything that's going to come out, but also the training that you're going to need to give that individual, right? And the coaching or the supervision, whatever it is that you're going to give that individual to support them in their role, that needs to be factored into those employment costs. And I think that is a kind of one critical thing that we forget. And actually, as leaders, when we're writing those budgets for funders, often the funders are not asking you for a breakdown of the employment costs. So there's nothing stopping you putting those costs into that area of a budget and saying, these are our employment costs. And if they need to be justified, then you justify them when they ask you, because that's what they are employment costs. So I think exactly like you're saying, Fran, it's this change of mindset, right, from the top, as well as kind of needing to come from the workers themselves as well, to take ownership of it.
Sure. Just to add very quickly, we have, as the entire kind of grant funding landscape, we're all guilty of this. We've kind of reduced our overheads as much as we possibly can, because otherwise we might not get funded, and we've gone down, and I've seen overheads going in at 10%. I mean, that's ludicrous. It's not viable. It's not viable. We don't have to go for that funding if it doesn't cover our costs. We don't have to go for it. Sometimes we might feel that we do, but it doesn't necessarily make it a sustainable business decision. From obviously, Mantle is a private sector business, and we've had advice from accountants that we should be calculating our staff costs at 1.7 rather than 1.1 or 1.2 like the charity sector is, because that accounts for sickness, it accounts for annual leave, it accounts for long-term absence, recruitment, whatever it might be, training. There are overheads that go with having a team of people, and we are, I think, in the purpose-driven space, we try and reduce those as much as we possibly can, and sometimes we've probably taken that a bit too far, and we've done that because that's what funders have pushed us towards, but at the expense again of our resilience and our well-being.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to come on to the next question with Bethany, but I think just to finish this a little bit off, for me, we did this in my own social enterprise in A Mind Apart. So when COVID happened, actually, I'd had to get rid of, because we work in the creative sector, I'd had to get rid of so many staff and so many freelancers, and I could do that, and I needed to for the sake of the business, that when we rebuilt it back up, I said from the beginning, salaries are going up. So I put all the salaries, everybody else was making cuts, putting people on leave, and I was putting salaries up. And I put my salaries up, we put our fees up, And we lost parents. You know, when we could start to come back and deliver performing arts classes, parents said, you're far too expensive. And my response to that was, I need to pay my staff. My staff team are valuable, and they're working with some of the most vulnerable people, and they are burning out. And then I changed our working week to a 4-day week. So we don't work beyond, nobody works beyond 4 days a week now. And in just changing those 3 little things, it changed our mindset around funding as well. So we went back to our clients, to the schools, to the councils, and said, you either pay us this or you don't work with us. It's that simple. And we introduced creative therapists into our work, and they're much more expensive. And we are one of the most expensive providers in what we do in the city, but we have the most referrals coming through, right? So I think there's something in that. And there's something in valuing yourself to that extent. And part of the reason for that is because my staff aren't burnt out, because they get their rest, they get, you know, the space that they need. The therapists only have so many clients that they see a week, and we don't go over that per therapist. So I think it's a scary change to make, and it's a mindset change. But actually, from my experience of doing it myself, I found that actually funders then bent towards us. So they said, no, but we want to fund you. So we said, okay, then fund a quarter of this project rather than the whole project. So, you know, we'd have a quarter funded here, a quarter from here funding this, and then we'd have a full project funded with 3 or 4 different funds and some income. So I think for me, one of the things that I would like to kind of say to people is that, like, it feels scary to make that change, to put your foot down and say, no, this is what it costs us. But in doing it, you're actually going to do yourself a massive service, and you're going to make sure then that you're more prepared to look after yourselves. And for me, that's the organisation element of it, right? Because if you're not creating a space for people to look after themselves within the team, they're not going to do it. So I think leading into Bethany, you do a lot of work with individual leaders. So it'd be really nice for us to hear about what you would say the key things are in a leader that you see that point towards burnout. So often we don't see ourselves burning out until it's too late. So kind of from your perspective, what are the key things when you're working with somebody, coaching them, and you're starting to realize, oh, hang on a minute, they're burning out? What are the key things that you're seeing there to acknowledge that?
Just before I go into that, it's just so refreshing and inspiring to hear you speak about how to do this differently, Jodie, and how you can actually go about doing that. And yes, it is scary, and I can just imagine all of the people that I've ever coached being terrified of that approach, but you're a testament to how it can actually work. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, when it comes to kind of recognizing signs of burnout, I think it's really important for all of us to take on that responsibility to recognize those signs and symptoms in ourselves, but also in our colleagues. And as more and more of us are working virtually or in different countries to the people that we're working around, it's even more important to be quite in tuned to the well-being of those around us and those that we're working with. I can remember heading up, a team of 12, 15 people, and we would all be in one open plan office. So if the person that was looking stressed had their head in their hands like this, I knew they needed a bit more attention, and I knew I needed, as a leader, to check in on them. That's not as easy now because we're working in our spare rooms, or we're not seeing each other every day, even if we are working in the office. So it's about recognizing those common signs and symptoms in different ways. And that can often look like exhaustion, so feeling kind of drained or lacking energy. So when you're having conversations with people, if they're saying I'm tired and they're saying that repetitively, pay attention to that. Think about, is that, don't say, oh my goodness, are you burnt out, straight away, because this could just be that they've got a toddler, right, Jodie and Fran? But it could also be a sign of burnout. So other things like reduced performance. Again, as somebody that's led a team, I can hand on heart say that if one of my team has suddenly had a drop in performance, I would have looked at doing things like a PIP in the past, but actually, do they not care, and have they taken their foot off the gas, or are they burnt out? Are they giving their absolute all and they're running out of energy? So instead of kind of going to the kind of disciplinary route, check in on people's well-being first, because that could well be a contributing factor, or there might be something else going on in their life that's meaning that they can't fully focus and give the 150% that they were giving that you assumed was 100%, because quite often we see it all the time. Just to digress slightly, when people start new jobs, we may have imposter syndrome, or we may be so grateful that we've been given the job that we want to prove ourselves and we want to do our best, or we care about the cause so much that we want to give our all to it. So we start a new job on 150%. And what happens after that is you don't then get to sit back and go back to 100%. You actually add percentages as you go, as your responsibility grows, as you take on more and more projects. So you're obviously at some point going to run out of percentage. You're going to run out of capacity. You're going to run out of energy. So I actually give quite controversial advice to any of my clients that are starting new jobs. And I say, look, go in at 80%. Start with, putting some boundaries in place. What time would you ideally like to finish work? 4 o'clock? Okay. Set that boundary from the beginning. Because if you work till 6, 7 o'clock at night, or 11 o'clock, like some of my clients, that's going to always be an expectation for you, right? And all of a sudden you stop work at 4 o'clock. People think, why is Sarah stopping at 4 o'clock? She's doing less than what she was before, and actually that's in line with what she should be doing. So that's just, if you're starting a new job, bit of advice there, just do what is comfortable for you from the beginning. But other things could look like increased negativity. So if somebody on your team, or if you yourself are kind of thinking, I'm feeling really pessimistic about this organization, I'm irritable more than I would like, or have some cynicism there about a project or something like that. It might be that the project's just not working, but it could be a sign of burnout. And then other physical symptoms that go with that kind of lacking energy and tiredness are things like headaches. I was speaking to a client this morning, actually, and all of the symptoms that she was kind of explaining to me sounded like dehydration. So the first thing that I said was, are you drinking enough water? And she says, she sits with a big bottle of water like most of us do, and she's drinking it all the time. But if you can imagine how you feel when you're dehydrated, that is very similar to how you might feel when you're burnt out. So just to kind of give you an example there. But yeah, recognizing burnout in yourself and other people as early as possible is how we go about making changes, and we're going to go into more detail about what those changes are later. But it's important to kind of recognize it early where possible.
Great, thanks, Bethany. So we're talking about the subject, and we seem to be doing an okay job of having a conversation about it, but why is it so hard to talk about? Because it's only recently that it's not, it's almost stopped being a taboo. And I say almost because I still think it is a bit of a taboo, and in some workplaces it certainly is. So I guess my question to both of you is, why is this stuff so hard to deal with and to talk about? And Bethany, when we see a team member or ourselves and we're feeling burnt out, why is it so hard for us to say to our board of trustees or our directors or the rest of our team, actually, I just need a break? Or telling a staff member, go and get a break, right? Go have a day in lieu, or whatever that needs to look like. So why what's going on there? Why is this a difficult topic for us?
So I think it's there's a lot of expectations from all sides. I think we get expectation from our boards, from our leaders, and that gets passed down. And then we don't want to show vulnerability, whether that's because of imposter syndrome or the fact that we've been made redundant before and we don't want that to happen again, or whatever it might be. I think showing vulnerability is really challenging, and that's where the culture of organizations needs to change. And like I said, I coach a lot of individuals, but I'm starting to move more now into working with organizations, because that's where the change needs to be, because I can coach individuals and support them with coping mechanisms as until I'm blue in the face. But actually, if as a sector, we're not making changes where people feel like they can talk about their own well-being in a really productive and mature way, then change isn't going to happen. And it's, you know, it's things like having limited resources, so putting additional stress on leaders or your colleagues. You feel like you don't want to do that. There's a camaraderie, I think, when it comes to working in the charity sector, where you're all there for the common cause, and perhaps there's guilt there about if you're not doing as much as your colleague, or you feel like you need a day off, that work's got to go somewhere, right? So I think there's that burden as well, where you don't want to necessarily, instead of the work stopping because you're stopping, I think it often goes elsewhere. So people don't want to burden others as well.
I think you said something interesting there that I picked up on. You said people, we don't like to be vulnerable, which I find absolutely ridiculously ironic, because we don't like to be vulnerable as purpose-driven leaders, charity, whatever leaders, but we want those people we're working with to be vulnerable to us.
Yeah.
So we're working with some of the most vulnerable in society, and we're asking them to be vulnerable to us so we can help them, but we're not going to be vulnerable ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? That's not leading by example on any level.
It's not, but I think it goes like it reminds me of the psychological kind of parent-child psychology, where in that scenario you're the parent and they're the beneficiary of the charity or whatever. In that scenario is the child, and you don't, I think from our perspective in society, you don't want your parent to be vulnerable. So that might be psychologically, that might be how that's explained. But it's like you say, leading by example is something that we need to build in more internally within organizations and externally when we're talking to partners and beneficiaries as well, I think.
Fran, I'm going to pass that question over to you. What do you think the issues are around it?
God, this is a big subject. It's a big question. I'm going to be controversial here and say I think that there is an immense amount of toxicity in the purpose-driven sector, and we see it hiding behind this veneer of altruism often. So that extends to boards, that extends to trustees and directors who are often less helpful than they should be, and sometimes not even just unhelpful, but actively toxic, actively destructive. That I've seen that extend to the staff team. It can be very easy as a purpose-driven employee, I suppose, to have an expectation that's totally unrealistic of your colleagues and your team members, and because you're doing something so good, you know, for the greater good or whatever, it's very easy for that to manifest as not just unrealistic expectations, but I've seen it manifest as bullying behavior. So I think there is an inherent fear in the sector, at every level in the sector, of showing vulnerability, and I think that extends all the way up, because this is specifically in the charity sector context. I think it's an odd governance arrangement that we have, which seems to be a legacy from Victorian kind of altruism again, where we have a CEO who isn't a board member. So we have a CEO who is responsible for everything, who holds everything, who is to blame for everything, whether, you know, it's their fault or not, who is managed by a board of trustees who have absolutely no idea what goes on in that organization, because they are there once a month or once a quarter, and they get a report of the highlights from the CEO, if, you know, if they read it, let's be honest. But yet they have all of the power over this particular individual. And I mean, I used to go into my board meetings absolutely terrified, and I see it in other CEOs. They go into the board meetings and they don't know what to say, they don't know what to put in their reports, they don't know how to phrase things. They're worried about saying things in a way that might be perceived to be, whatever, the wrong decision, a sign of weakness, whatever it is. And I just find it immensely peculiar that we have this situation where we have a group of unqualified, unpaid, and uninformed people who are managing the entire operations of a charity, and the CEO, who is the person that's holding everything, who knows everything, and who is keeping the show on the road, let's be honest, just gets whipped at this meeting once a month or once a quarter. What is this? Like, what are we doing? I just find it very, very strange. So, and I think, inevitably that causes problems all the way down, because everybody knows that the CEO is nervous when it comes to trustee time. Everybody knows that, they need to kind of tiptoe because that person is probably a bit more irritable and a bit more nervous or anxious than usual. Yeah, I don't know. I just find the entire governance arrangement very, very strange indeed. And you do see some of the large charities that have the, I suppose, the privilege of being able to pick their trustees according to skills and actually maybe even interview them or ask them to apply. But for the most part, small charities are just scrabbling around to find trustees that are willing to give up some time to do this and to make sure that they're core. And quite often they end up being the wrong people. That's my soapbox again.
So, Fran, what can we do about it? So I guess there's two sides to this. There's what can we do about it from a personal level. So I'm a CEO of a charity. I can't change the way that a board member may react, or I can't change, the board. Perhaps I can. Perhaps I'm lucky that I've got a board. I know when I worked in a very recent social enterprise, that actually I had an amazing board of directors and they were brilliant. But I think, again, that's the difference between the charity and the social enterprise world as well. And I see that a lot in the work that we do. But I think so I guess there's two questions. What I'm getting at is, what can we change in ourselves? So the personal change, what can we do differently to manage our own expectations, but also put boundaries in place where boundaries might not have been in place previously, maybe. And then also, what can we do on an organizational level to try and get our board members or our team to really think about this stuff? So acknowledging that we can't make them change their minds, because you can't do that. But we can kind of plant things there that maybe make them think about things a bit differently, that eventually might change their minds. So those are kind of the two levels of it. Who wants to go first?
I'll take the practical stuff if that's helpful. Performance management of trustees. And they're not going to like it because they're volunteers, but you can performance manage your trustees, or your chair can performance manage your trustees. It's relatively straightforward to put that in place. It can be difficult with existing trustees, so it's kind of maybe a long-term change process that you would need to implement, but you can have performance management for trustees in the same way as you would with your staff team. So, clear expectations of participation in training around governance, clear expectations around roles and responsibilities, and that is to say that they are responsible for strategic oversight and not operational issues, although sometimes they choose to try and get involved in operational issues. So working to develop, I think the key thing is working to develop a very strong relationship with your chair, and there's lots of support for that, like the Chair's Compass Guide, and the Akivo do some great work on this. There's loads of support to develop that relationship between CEO and chair, and then between the two of you to implement clear performance management expectations, enforcing that length of service requirement and reappointment of trustees, and then after a certain amount of time they must step down, is important. Trustee role descriptions, all of that stuff, but it needs to be implemented. So your chair has to have a backbone, because you as the CEO, because you're not on the board, have quite limited influence. You can ask for this stuff and you can try and persuade, but you have quite limited influence. So your chair needs to be somebody that not only supports the organisation and is a good chair, but also has the the strength and the strength of character to be able to have sometimes quite difficult conversations with trustees, without falling back on that, oh yeah, but they are a volunteer, they're taking on a legal role as the trustee of an organization, that's volunteer or not, they need to be acting in a way that is in accordance with that level of responsibility. So yeah,
as you're talking, Fran, sorry, I'm just thinking as you're talking that I've got a very good friend who's the CEO of a council, and what you're saying like mirrors the conversations I have with her about how she deals with her council and the councillors, and she needs to have the chair on board, and when that chair changed, the whole council effectively changed. So I think it's interesting that, and this goes back to your point that you were just making about it not being a suitable model for what you need to achieve, because effectively we're working like councils, right? That's how councils are working. So there's definitely a political mind frame in it, which I think from the charity world, we're terrified of doing that. We're absolutely terrified of thinking politically. And actually, sometimes, as harsh as it sounds and as controversial as it might sound, in order for you to get rid of somebody on your board because they've been there far too long and they're just causing havoc, actually, you've got to go around all the other board members and rally them up, because they're the only ones that can vote them off, unless you're members orientated. So I think there's something in that we shouldn't be scared of doing the politics.
It's politics, and every single one of the people on this call, and anybody who's not on this call who is a charity CEO, I can assure you that you know immensely more about what goes on in your organization and how your organization should be run than any member of your board. So remember that when you're having those conversations with them and they're challenging you, you're the person on the ground, you're the person that's keeping the show on the road. So yeah, it's so hard, especially when you're burnt out and you've got nothing left to give, to have those meetings where you feel like you're just pushing a boulder up a hill, or you're spending like 40 minutes of the meeting and deciding what font the impact report needs to be, and when you've got like the risk register over in the corner that nobody's thinking about, that stuff. But you just remember that you are the person that's keeping the show on the road, and you're doing a bloody good job at it.
So Bethany, how do we manage ourselves to get ourselves to that place where we can talk to that board or talk to others in the organisation about what we need?
It's tough, isn't it, at that leadership level, because you're wanting to kind of have those challenging conversations and influence and negotiate up, but you're also wanting to be to lead by example for the rest of the organisation. So you find yourself in this middle ground quite often as a leader, and that goes hand in hand with the stress of that position as well. You're getting the pressure from the board that you're desperate not to pass on any further onto the rest of the organisation. So quite often CEOs or senior leadership teams, depending on the size of the organisations, will shoulder a lot of that responsibility and a lot of that stress, and try and hold fast so that it doesn't affect the rest of the organisation. And a lot of what Fran has just mentioned around making changes to governance and how boards work is integral in making sure that that pressure is not put on CEOs, so that they don't feel like they have to really shoulder that and not pass it on. But there are things that you can do on an individual basis that can help and make things better. And I talk about this all the time with my clients, and this is going to be a very light touch version really of everything that I go into a lot of depth with my clients. And I've got a few on the call today that'll be like, oh yeah, we've spoken about that. But things like managing a healthy work-life balance and setting really clear boundaries is really important. Having dedicated time for work and dedicated time for home is really important as well, which is very difficult when we're often working in our homes. But I do that myself by having set working times and it gets to 6 o'clock, and my husband and my toddler literally knock at my office door and are ready to have dinner with me. So there's no working over 6 o'clock. That is a boundary that is set, and try and say no to an 18-month-old that wants her mummy back is just never going to happen. So that's quite a helpful boundary setting technique. But things like learning and applying techniques to your time management as well is really helpful. So strategies that you've probably all heard of, but actually implementing them, getting to know them and really making them part of your routine is great. So things like having a digital to-do list, instead of having reams of paper or post-it notes or it all being in your inbox, having things organized by area of your role, and then dated. So I use Google, and Tasks board is the one that I use, but there's many different versions. Trello, To Do on Microsoft, and they all integrate into your emails as well. So it's just about using the technology that's available to you to sort of download your tasks, download your thoughts, so it holds it for you and you're not having to keep all of that in your head. And I definitely should have got shares in Google before I started telling all of my clients about Taskboard, because it is a winner across everyone that I coach. But there's other things like the Pomodoro techniques, and making sure that you're taking breaks. And by that, I don't mean a lunch break. I mean, are you going to the toilet when you need to go to the toilet? Like, it's basic, right? And it's icky to talk about, but I guarantee you've all been there where you're like, I'll just finish this email, or I'll just finish this grant application, or whatever it is. And then I'll treat myself to go to the toilet, or I'll treat myself with a cup of tea. Like, no, we need to be really thinking about our physical needs as much as our mental needs, right? And I'm just saying that because I hear it all the time and I've been there myself. I know that it's a challenge. But yeah, there's lots of things that can be implemented, and I do regular blogs about all of these things in much more depth. So if you head to my website and look at the resources tab, there's tons of blogs on there all about all of these different techniques that you can kind of learn from. One of the ones that my clients are loving at the moment is the 1-3-5 rule, where you pick 1 big task, 3 medium tasks, and 5 small tasks to tackle each day. And before you even think about doing anything else, you get those done first. So it might be that you do more in the day, but you do those first and you get those done, and you feel that kind of dopamine hit for getting that done, and actually kind of feeling really efficient before you take on anything else. But yeah, there's lots out there that can help, but it's just having the kind of brain capacity to actually put them in place when we are already burnt out that can be the challenge.
Great, thanks, Bethany. Yeah, I think I've recently gone to a digital to-do list because I do so many things. I've got like a charity that I manage, a enterprise, and then Mansell, and then my child, and then my house. And I always say I'm the CEO of an extra business being my house and my child.
Totally.
But I think, yeah, so I've recently gone to the digital list, and it's like magic.
Yeah,
it's amazing. You know, at 12 o'clock at night when I'm thinking, oh, I need to do that because on the digital to-do list. It's great.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think not having that, we all talk about mental load, don't we? Be it as parents or as leaders or whatever it is, and to have something that's on your phone or that's really easily accessible, where you can just make that note and you can take it out of your brain and house it somewhere, so you don't have to carry that around with you, makes a huge difference to your kind of bandwidth and how you can be present in different situations. I'm sure everyone on this call right now is listening intently to what we're doing whilst also planning and prepping for other things they've got later on. But if you were to utilize something like a digital to-do list to just pop notes in or pop small tasks in, it does make the world of difference. And I've seen it really like be transformational genuinely for many of my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely the other thing that I do is if I'm feeling super overwhelmed because I've got so much going on, I get to a point sometimes where I get so overwhelmed, and I might I don't tend to hit it often because I'm very self-aware of it, but I'm heading towards anxiety. So, or I might have hit it at that point. So what I tend to find is I look at my to-do list and there's things that need to do, and I just can't do anything. And I get to that point where, and because I work for myself with everything that I do, I'm in charge. you know, I've got nobody saying you need to do it by here unless I've got a, you know, a funding deadline or something that I can't get away from. So I get to this point where I just can't do anything. Can't do anything at all. Like, my brain is just shut down. It's gone into shutdown mode. So then what I tend to do is I break it up, rather than per day, I break it up for the week. So then I'll write out like maybe 3 tasks, and I keep it really small until I'm back into my flow of it. But I might write down like just a few tasks that I need to get through this week. And I don't put a time scale on it in terms of I'm going to do it on this day or that day or this time. And basically, whenever I feel like I can cope with that, then I'll do it. And that might be at night sometimes for me, because I've got a 12-month-old. So actually on the days that I'm not working, I might still have odd bits that I need to do. So that might be 12 o'clock at night or whatever, 10, whatever it is, I'm working. But that's kind of a boundary that I've allowed myself because I want to spend time with my child. So I think for me, I don't put timelines to things. What I do is I task orientate it. So then I do the task, I think I've done it. And if I've done it over 3 or 4 hour sittings, done it, right? And that will often help me get back on track. So I think that's also a really good kind of technique to use. And I will often use that with staff as well. So I'll often get them to think like that. And it also, what it does with your team as well, if you get them to think like that, it takes away the whole time watching rubbish. Because, you know, time clocking is not helpful to any of us, and it's not helpful to your team. Like, actually what you need to know is, can they get the task done? How they get it done is their time management, and actually you need to support them with that. You don't need to be saying, have you worked from 8 till 5 today? Oh, wait a minute,
you're irrelevant, isn't it?
Like they've done everything they need to do, but they can't leave half an hour earlier. What is that? Like, come on.
Totally.
So I think once you start thinking like that as well, that really helps to move things a little bit and to change the way that we limit ourselves. And I mean, the worst ERDF money was awful. European money. Anybody that was ever on a European contract, it was horrific. And I talk from experience, because you had to time clock everything. Like, that was the stressful point. As soon as that contract was gone, it was like I could breathe again. So I think
are still a thing though, aren't they? Yeah. I'm seeing it a massive change actually in I coach quite a few freelance fundraisers, and I'm seeing that freelance fundraisers are changing, and I'm encouraging it as well, to having contracts with charities based on a day rate and a certain amount of days a month or a week. And they're switching it up to actually write proposals and work with charities to focus on outcomes and deliverables. So it frees up that freelancer to do that work by a certain date, but in the time that they need to, and manage that internally so that they know that they're not going over the amount of hours, so that they're getting a decent hourly rate for it. But actually it takes a massive amount of pressure off to know that they're not having to clock in and clock out. And why should they as a freelancer, even
and
more
it's
so as an
exactly,
employee?
and that's exactly what Fran and I have done at Mantle. I mean, we literally had that conversation weeks ago, and that's exactly how we work. We work on a project basis rather than a day rate, because the day rate doesn't serve us and it doesn't serve the client. Because you can't, with the day rate, you can't get hold of the client when you might need to get hold of the client. You know, you need that flexibility, I think, and you need that availability to be able to say, well, actually, it's taken me longer this month, but next month, you know, it's taken me less. So I think I mean, Fran and I definitely agree with that, because we've had that conversation for Mantle. So one of the things I like to talk about is, and I'll often get my clients to think about this, is who are your tribe? So I talk about a tribe quite a lot. So I say, who are the tribe around you that are not part of your organization necessarily? So one of the questions that I want to put to you both is, how can we recognize burnout in ourselves? And then how can we bring others around us to support in helping us to prevent that burnout? So how do we bring that tribe around us to hold us accountable to that? And what could that look like for different people? So Fran, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I speak to my experience. When I was a CEO, I did, I'll keep it brief, I'm mindful we've only got a couple of minutes. I went on a leadership summit that was arranged by, I think it was Lloyds Bank Foundation who funded it, and we went down to London. We did lots of 3-day stayovers in London. They paid for the hotel and stuff. It was nice. But there was lots of CEOs there doing the same job as I was doing, to all intents and purposes, with other organisations. And we had an opportunity to do some stuff in the day, and it was all very lovely and structured. But then we had a drink at night, or a dinner at night. And that's when the true kind of stuff comes out, isn't it? Like, oh, I've had a glass of wine, I'm going to tell you how shit it really is. Like, and actually, even though I don't work in housing anymore, we're all still close. We're all still close. Some of them are clients of mine now, actually, because, you know, we recognize how hard it is, just, you know, for everybody. Yeah, we recognize how hard it is. And I think that's the thing. Somebody else who's doing your job, but who's not a competitor. If you can get somebody like that around you, or several of those people, so joining kind of peer networking groups is a good one, or communities. You need people who understand it, but who are not a perceived threat, you know, or who are not threatened by you when it comes to like being a competitor for funding or something.
So I suppose, where are I'm going to throw the question at you, Fran, so you can answer this. Where are the sorts of places that, if I was a CEO, where are the places that I would look for that? So have you got any kind of general suggestions for people on where they might go for that?
There's lots of stuff. Lots of stuff. I mean, if you've got funding, there's probably something attached to, if you've got one of those lovely funders that give added value. Lloyds Bank Foundation are great for this stuff. They're quite often running, like, you know, peer forums, some sort of kind of action learning sets type things, you know, those kind of professionally organized forums are great. There's probably something locally through your VCS organization, probably, if you have one, they probably organize some sort of like networking lunch. I see Terry's on the call. I know they do loads and loads of networking stuff at Sen, networking and peer mentoring stuff. Yeah, lots and lots of things. And we have a couple of things that we're doing through Mantle, where there will be online communities available to people if that floats your boat. You know, we'll be doing training and kind of long-term training programs, which will have an online element. I think it depends what you want, really. It depends if you want somebody who understands it from your sector, or somebody else who's just kind of doing the same job, perhaps in a different environment. But finding somebody who is a peer is useful. Action learning sets, I think, are phenomenal. I think they're a great tool. So if there's any kind of professionally facilitated, and that's the key, getting a good facilitator, professionally facilitated action learning sets are worth their weight in gold. So if you can tap into any of those, I would highly recommend. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Fran. Before I go to Bethany, I'm just going to do a quick plug, because you started it off. We do have our accelerator course for social enterprises, but you don't have to be a social enterprise. So I think our accelerator course will start on Monday, and we've actually got some free places. So because we've been having these conversations with people, we decided to open up 5 free places. 2 have already been taken in less than 24 hours. So you'll get a link in an email when this call's finished. So if you want to join that accelerator group, then please do. It starts on Monday, and the dates and everything are online. So yeah, don't miss that freebie. So Bethany, what can we do individually then?
So I think there's a lot that Fran said that I would echo there. Things like the action learning is fantastic. I've got personal experience of that. I think it's brilliant, both as a facilitator and as a participant. They're amazing. Things like networking events. I go to a local in-person charity leaders networking event in Bristol. It happens sort of 3 or 4 times a year. And that just, you know, over breakfast, talking about what's happening for you, what challenges you're coming up against, and just listening to other people and realizing that you're not alone in this, and it's not a personal failing on your part, that the sector and the world is challenging right now, and we are almost set up to find this hard. Hearing that from others, I think is really, really helpful. And then as we're plugging, things like coaching are really helpful. So obviously I support a lot of people that are experiencing burnout, and on a one-to-one basis and a group basis, facilitating those conversations. It's really humbling to hear the other side of, you know, hearing people be vulnerable, hearing people share what they're finding really challenging, sharing that with your colleagues as well. Like you call it a tribe, Jodie, I call it a village. It's the same thing. I speak about that all the time with people, and it is about finding your village. When I'm running my business, I've got people that I speak to regularly that run other businesses like you guys, and it's just about finding people that you can really have open and honest conversations with, like-minded people that are experiencing similar things to you, and they're going to be out there. It's just about being brave enough to start those conversations, I think, isn't it?
Great. I think LinkedIn's a great space to do that. And I think people are way more receptive to it on LinkedIn these days after COVID, and, you know, people working from home. So I think that's a really good tool to use as well, to just...
I would imagine if anyone on this call puts out on LinkedIn that they're looking to meet someone to have a chat with them about leadership and burnout, they would get...
Yeah.
They'd get loads of DMs with people willing to have that conversation, I'm sure.
Sure. So pretty much the final questions then, and then we're going to open it up a little bit for any of you guys on the call if you've got anything that you want to share, or questions, or I don't know, you might have examples that you want to share for others. So the almost final question is, how do we, thinking about, we've cultivated that in ourselves, how do we then cultivate that in the wider team that maybe are where we're leading? You know, what sort of things can we put in place to help our staff, our volunteers, not so much the board at this point, but maybe those that we're managing? So our staff, our volunteers, how can we help them to support kind of their mental well-being around this? I think I'm thinking in terms of my own experience. One of the issues quite a few years ago that we used to have with Mind Apart was we got into this place because we were working with really vulnerable families. We'd regularly get families trying to call us at like really silly o'clock. And we got into this space where we were almost like it was okay to be working at stupid hours. And actually, because I'm from a youth worker background, very originally, my youth worker would kick in and I'd be like, don't worry, I'm coming to the house, I'm coming round. And I'd like be round at some family member's house, you know, with the police, trying to deal with their 15-year-old chaotic kid with autism and ADHD that was throwing a hissy everywhere. Because I was the only person that could get anywhere with this person. And I think what I realized, and I mean, I was really young and naive at this point, but I think what I realized was I was slowly fostering this as a culture. So as I started to hire people and bring people in and build the business, actually they started to do things like this. So then that's when all the policies suddenly had to come in play. And I realized actually I need to be really strict on this stuff. And I had to put all of that in place. So I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about and where I'm coming from with that. So what would the things that you guys would suggest be that are healthy things to do for your team?
Yeah, I mean, it is all about culture, and culture can be toxic and culture can be healthy and productive, and that's a choice. We have to be intentional about the cultures that we're breeding, and if we're not intentional about it, then it probably will be toxic. It takes work, like work-life balance. Balance is a verb, it's a doing word, it needs to be maintained and looked after. Culture is the same thing. If it's not even spoken about, if you don't talk about the word culture and you're not speaking about that, then it's going to be probably a negative thing that you're just not aware of, or that you're aware of and you're not giving enough attention to. What you were describing there, Jodie, is exactly that, kind of leading by example. When leaders prioritize their well-being, it sets a tone across the entire organization. If you as a leader are working long hours, or sending emails on weekends and at the middle of the night and that kind of thing, it's just showing that that's what's expected and that's what people need to do to perhaps be successful. We, as teams of people, we still look at our leaders as aspirational figures of, you know, one day I might want to be. And if we're getting emails in the middle of the night, or we're seeing the leaders overwork, we are, you know, taking that on board, even if it's subconsciously, to think that's what it takes maybe to get to that point of that kind of success. So leading by example is huge. I'm not saying it's easy at all, because as I mentioned earlier, you're getting the pressure from above, and then you've got the pressure of not affecting the rest of the organization. It's hard, and that's why you need support as a leader. But things like promoting open communication, so encouraging an environment where staff, including board members, feel comfortable discussing well-being concerns, and that can be challenging if you've got a bit of an old school board that, you know, haven't even caught up that mental health's okay to talk about. You know, how are they going to be okay to talk about burnout, because we're on the next stage here and they haven't even got with the program of what we were okay talking about last time. So thinking about kind of open communication, telling them what you're hearing, telling your board what you're hearing your staff talk about, what's important to your staff, what's important to you, and getting them to hear you is really important. They might be listening, but are they hearing you? And that goes for when you're talking to your board, but also when you're listening to your team as well. Are you really hearing the challenges that they are facing? Because I hear it all the time as a coach. You know, my team members aren't productive, they're not doing enough. And I say, well, are you listening to what they're finding challenging? Why are they not doing enough in your eyes? What's holding them up? Do they not have autonomy or authority to push things forward? Are they having to check with you? In which case that's putting a massive amount of strain on your plate as well. So processes can definitely change. Processes can help massively when it comes to that, giving people responsibility, empowering people to push things forward, and then those boundaries as well, setting really clear boundaries and when people can communicate via email. I've had clients set like no meeting Fridays, that kind of thing, just to ensure that people are getting a bit of a break, or maybe 50-minute meetings if they were usually an hour, to build in that toilet break that is so important. I keep banging on about, but it is so important. But yeah, those kind of things can massively help. I've got so much more I could talk about, but I know that we're pushed for time.
Thanks, Bethany. Fran, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think just I think Bethany's hit the nail on the head. All of those things are what we should be doing. I'm just reflecting on my own experience when I was a charity CEO, and desperately wanted to listen to my staff team and hear their concerns and hear what they were struggling with. But quite honestly, just was terrified of having those conversations because I had nowhere to go with that information. And it was awful, just a horrible place to be in when somebody's coming to you and saying, actually, you know, the pay rise that we've had isn't enough. I can't pay my mortgage, or I can't afford childcare, or, you know, I'm desperate to take a holiday, but I just haven't got any space. There's nobody to pick up my clients, whatever it is. And having nothing, because capacity is so stretched, and we've done ourselves in with the charity sector and funding and all of that stuff. So I think, again, it's back to that question of sustainability and resilience and risk. And you know, the biggest thing that I think we can do with our team is make sure that we're doing something about making our charities run in a more sustainable way, or social enterprises but run in a more sustainable way, that we're covering our costs, that we're not reducing our fees or our budgets to such an extent that the people who work for those organizations are the ones that are picking up the slack and suffering. Because I think what we're seeing brutally is a trend to the expectation of frontline staff having to subsidize the work of the organization through, you know, increased hours, reduced pay, just the stress and carrying all of that stuff on their shoulders. So yeah, I think, you know, as leaders, we only have so much bandwidth to be able to help. You can always listen, and you can always sort of say, you know, that you hear what somebody is saying, but actually the the action is, you know, what are we doing to make these organizations actually more sustainable so that we're not having to have these conversations? And that's about pushing back on funders and pushing back on commissioners, and having difficult conversations with these people who think that we can continue to deliver more and more and more for less. It's not fair on the people who are delivering the services.
I think just to add to what Fran said there is almost an attitude that looking after well-being for staff is a luxury, or is a nice to have, rather than it being an absolute essential. And I think we just don't hear well-being being talked about as something that is absolutely intrinsically linked to sustainability. We think sustainability is linked to funding, and it's absolutely also linked to the well-being of our staff. And it just seems bonkers to me that as a charity sector who is so caring and wants to be everything for the beneficiaries on the end of whatever cause we're working for, that we're not prioritizing the people, the very people that make it all possible. Why is helping a beneficiary at the detriment of the person that's doing the helping? It just seems out of balance entirely. I've literally had coaching clients working for a mental health charity, and the mental health charity wasn't prioritizing the mental health of their staff.
Yeah, Fran and I have been in very similar identical situation actually, very recently. So yeah, with a client. So we've just to finish off then, we have given loads of thoughts and advice and tips. And if anybody on the call is like me, unless I've been sat there making notes, which I suspect most people haven't, what probably a lot of that stuff is probably I've thought about it and it's probably disappeared for a bit. So I would like each of you to give one top tip so that we leave the guys on this call with 2 top tips. And those are the 2 things that they can go away with and action. So what would your one top tip be each? Have a think.
I have one. For any leaders working with chairs, whether that's charity leaders, social enterprise leaders, if you have a chair on your board, that relationship between CEO and the chair is the most important relationship in the entire organization. So get to know them, get to figure out how to work together. There are Akivo do some fantastic stuff around developing the relationship between CEO and chair, and between the 2 of you, you've got all bases covered and you can really implement some fantastic changes. So yeah, get to know your chair.
And who knows, you might end up forming another business separately together, like Fran and myself did.
Who knew?
Definitely.
Very similar to that, it would be to be an advocate for well-being culture. So when you're having discussions with your board, with your chair, with your team, you as a leader, you're going to probably have a team of managers that you look after. So if you're an advocate of well-being culture, that's going to spread throughout the organization. So encourage that well-being culture within your organization. Promote self-care, even though it's a buzzword that I quite hate. Have open communication, support all of your staff and not just the leaders, because if the leaders are struggling, then quite honestly everybody's struggling.
Great, fab. I'm going to give one extra top tip just on the back of what Bethany said. We do a thing in A Mind Apart that came from when I was leading it, where we do like a check-in, we call it check-in. So if we've got a busy week or we've got performances happening, there's a lot happening on, we have this rule where you check in on each other. So you check, have you eaten? Have you been to the toilet recently? And you're allowed to ask other staff members that question. So often I'll roll in from somewhere to a performance and the first thing my staff member will ask me, have you eaten, Jodie? Where have you been before? Have you had some food? And that is so lovely. And it's so lovely that they still feel they can do that as the director coming in and not being operational anymore. It's so lovely that actually that culture is still there and they feel that they can do that with, you know, somebody from the top. So yeah, that would be my top tip. like
you've given
check
that
in something.
permission, haven't you? And I think
Absolutely.
permission is so important.
Absolutely.
Permission to have these conversations, permission to be vulnerable, will stop people from being so worried about talking about this than feel like they're going to get into trouble for being burnt out or something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we have come to the end of our conversation, but we'd love for you guys to take this conversation beyond. So continue having it with your teams and other people.